She stood beneath the blinding lights of the U.S. Air Force Global Command Hall in Colorado Springs. Hundreds of high-ranking officers filled the seats, their medals shining like polished armor, their faces tight with ceremony. It was a night designed to celebrate valor, the kind of night where names are spoken with reverence, and silence holds more weight than applause. But when Colonel Naomi Ellison stepped onto the stage, something changed. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Her stride was steady, not proud, just deliberate, like a woman walking toward a reckoning. The announcer's voice rang through the chamber, reading a sanitized version of a mission the public would never fully know. They spoke of heroism, of resilience, of sacrifice. But what they didn't say was that Naomi had returned from a jungle no one expected her to survive. And what she brought back wasn't just 3 wounded teammates, it was the truth. Ugly. Inconvenient. Buried deep. General Rollins, seated in the front row, had seen 1,000 commendation ceremonies. But as Naomi came to attention and saluted, his instincts screamed. Something was off. This wasn't pride. This was protest in uniform. Then, in a moment that shattered the entire evening, Naomi did the unthinkable. Without breaking eye contact, she raised her dress shirt, just high enough to reveal a mess of twisted scar tissue carved across her ribs. The room gasped, not because of the scars themselves, but because no one had expected the truth to have a face, or a body, or a voice. Rollins froze. Not out of shock but guilt. Because 2 years ago he'd signed a mission order that should have never left his desk. And tonight, the survivor of that mission stood before him, not asking for honor, but demanding accountability. This wasn't just another medal. This was the moment the Air Force's most sacred hall stopped pretending that paperwork could cover pain. Because some scars don't fade. And some soldiers don't forget. This is the story of Colonel Naomi Ellison, the night she raised her shirt and forced the truth into the light. And once you hear what really happened, you'll understand why the general never stood the same way again. The moment Naomi lowered her shirt and buttoned it back up, the room was no longer the same. Applause that had once been warm now felt hollow, forced. Eyes darted around the hall, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some officers looked away, pretending not to understand. Others stared straight ahead, frozen by the weight of what had just been revealed. Naomi stood still, unmoved, her expression calm. Not defiant. Not emotional. Just resolved. General Rollins slowly rose from his seat. He approached the podium, each step echoing across the marble floor like the tick of a countdown clock. The applause faded entirely. Silence swallowed the space. He reached for the medal, the Air Force Cross, held it in both hands and looked Naomi in the eye. "Colonel Ellison," he said, voice low, "for extraordinary courage under fire." Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't smile. And she didn't salute. She simply looked at him, and in that glance Rollins saw something he hadn't seen in years. Truth. Not the kind that lives in reports or comes wrapped in ceremony. But raw, quiet truth. The kind that burns behind the eyes of someone who knows the system failed them, and who still showed up anyway. He hesitated, then pinned the medal to her uniform. For a brief moment, his hand lingered, not out of reverence but confusion. Regret. Then he stepped back. Naomi nodded once. Wasn't thanks. It was acknowledgement. The announcer began reading off the next name as if nothing had happened. But everyone knew something had. Naomi returned to her seat in the second row. She sat down, spine straight, hands folded. But her presence pulled gravity toward her like a storm front. The air felt different. Charged. General Rollins didn't return to his seat. Instead, he remained standing, watching her, while 100 cameras continued flashing like nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. This ceremony wasn't a celebration anymore. It had become a question. One that lingered in every corner of that room. What really happened out there? And why did the woman they were honoring look like she'd just exposed the lie everyone else had agreed to keep quiet? That night, the medal sparkled on her chest. But it wasn't the medal people remembered. It was the moment a black woman stood in front of the entire U.S. Air Force and showed them that survival didn't need applause. It needed answers. After the ceremony, Naomi didn't stick around to shake hands or pose for press photos. She walked off the stage, her footsteps calm but firm, and made her way toward the West Wing exit, the one most people didn't notice. But General Rollins noticed. He followed her. They ended up in a narrow side corridor outside a secure briefing room. The walls were lined with portraits of decorated heroes, their faces locked in time. Naomi stopped in front of one, a young black airman who had died during a classified op nearly a decade ago. She looked at it for a long moment. He wasn't supposed to die either, she said quietly. Rollins stood behind her, unsure of what to say. Finally he spoke. You refused this medal once. Why accept it now? Naomi turned to him. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was something much heavier. Something tired. Because this time, I wanted someone in uniform to look me in the eye and ask why. Rollins looked down. He cleared his throat. I read your file. The Operation Stone Path, was a high-risk retrieval. Recon and rescue. You led a 5-person team. Intel suggested light enemy presence. Naomi shook her head slowly. No, sir. That's what the file says. But it's not what happened. She took a step closer, her voice steady. We were sent into a kill zone, General. No backup. No signal extraction plan. No drone cover. The enemy knew exactly where we'd land. Down to the second. He blinked, caught off guard. Are you saying it was compromised? I'm saying, she said firmly, that someone in command either lied or didn't care if we made it out alive. The words hit him harder than he expected. Not because they were dramatic, but because they weren't. There was no theatrics in Naomi's tone. No performance. Just fact. Brutal and calm. He searched her face. Why haven't you said this before? Naomi looked him dead in the eye. Because when you're the only one who comes back, they don't want your story, they want your silence. And for 2 years she'd given them exactly that. Until tonight. Until a single act, raising her shirt and showing the scars they never documented, forced the truth into daylight. And now the question wasn't whether she'd speak. It was whether anyone would dare to listen. 2 years earlier, the jungle heat had been unbearable. Colonel Naomi Ellison wiped sweat from her brow as she stepped off the transport chopper and into the thick green of the Colombian rainforest. The mission briefing had called it a surgical extraction. In and out. Low resistance. No more than 24 hours on the ground. The objective, recover a kidnapped U.S. scientist named Dr. Felix Moore, last tracked to a remote village near the Magdalena River. But the minute her boots hit the mossy ground, Naomi felt the difference. It wasn't just the humidity, though that clung to the skin like wet cotton. It was the stillness. No birds. No wind. No background hum of the jungle. Just silence. And silence in a place like that was never good. Her team, 5 in total, moved in formation, eyes scanning the tree line. Tech Specialist Ramos was at the rear, checking for signal activity. Sergeant Kim flanked her left, rifle at low ready. They were good people. Sure. Disciplined. And completely unprepared for what was waiting. They hiked 5 miles deep into the canopy, following coordinates that had come directly from high command. The trail led to a clearing that looked too perfect. Too open. Naomi signaled a halt. This doesn't feel right, she said through the comms. Before anyone could reply, the forest exploded. A deafening roar of automatic fire burst from the treeline. Landmines detonated beneath the moss. Flames and debris shot skyward. Screams. Gunfire. Chaos. Naomi dove behind a fallen log, adrenaline surging. Her headset crackled with fragments of panic. Hit. We're pinned. Ramos is down. Something hot sliced across her rib cage. She felt the impact more than the pain. Shrapnel tore through her side and lodged itself deep. Her uniform soaked with blood within seconds. But she didn't stop. Through the smoke, she saw Sergeant Kim dragging another teammate. Naomi crawled toward them, each breath stabbing her lungs. She grabbed the back of Kim's vest and pulled them both into cover. The jungle, once quiet, was now alive with fire. It was a kill zone, precise, coordinated, intentional. Not a random ambush. This was mapped. Planned. And it was then, as she stared at the flames flickering through the trees, that Naomi realized the mission wasn't just dangerous. It was a setup. Someone had fed them to the wolves, and she was bleeding out in the middle of a test range disguised as a rescue op. Fall back, she ordered, voice raw. We move north. Now. They didn't have time to argue. They ran, or limped, through fire and mud, deeper into the unknown, wounded, panicked, and betrayed. And Naomi, she led them. Even as her side screamed in agony and every step felt like she was being stabbed from the inside out. That was the beginning. The beginning of the 3-mile crawl that would change everything, and leave scars no metal could ever justify. Naomi's side was on fire. Every breath came like glass. Her vision blurred at the edges, sweat and blood stinging her eyes. But there was no time to think. No time to scream. Only time to move. The jungle didn't let up. Rounds cracked through the air like lightning strikes. Trees exploded into splinters. Mud turned to red sludge beneath their boots. Sergeant Kim had gone silent, but his leg was mangled. Naomi could see the bone. She grabbed him by his vest and dragged him behind a thick root cluster. One down. Still alive. Next was tech specialist Ramos. Unconscious, face pale, soaked in blood from a scalp wound. She couldn't carry him and shoot at the same time. So she made a choice. She slung her rifle across her chest, ducked low, and hauled Ramos over her shoulder. Her ribs screamed. Something inside shifted, not metaphorically. Physically. A jagged grind under her right side. It was a miracle she didn't black out. But she moved anyway. She had to. Third was Private Holloway, the youngest in the unit. 22. First tour. He'd taken shrapnel to the thigh and was sobbing, apologizing for slowing them down. Naomi knelt in front of him, her voice calm. "You're not slowing us down. You're coming with me." He nodded, choking back tears, and leaned on her. That was the moment she became more than a leader. She became a lifeline. 3 miles. Through brush. Through traps. Through a storm that didn't stop. Naomi carried Ramos, steadied Holloway, and led Kim with hand signals when her voice failed. She kept them moving with sheer willpower. Her uniform was soaked in blood. Hers. Theirs. It didn't matter anymore. At one point, she bit down on her own sleeve to keep from crying out. The pain was unbearable, but noise meant death. When they finally reached the edge of the exfil zone, her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees. Couldn't stand. A Navy SEAL medic sprinted toward her, his voice a blur. "Holy hell, what happened?" Naomi barely got the words out. "They're alive," she said. "Take them first." Then everything went black. She didn't wake up until 2 days later in a hospital bed in Miami. And when she did, the pain wasn't the first thing she felt. It was relief. She'd brought them home. But deep down she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the start of the reckoning. The first thing Naomi saw when she opened her eyes was a white ceiling and the soft pulse of monitors. She tried to move, but her entire right side lit up with pain. A nurse appeared, gently pressing a button to deliver more meds. Her voice was kind. "You're in Miami. You've been here 2 days. They brought you in with internal bleeding, 3 fractured ribs, and embedded shrapnel near your lung. You're lucky, Colonel. You saved 3 lives." Naomi blinked slowly, her throat dry. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. The nurse handed her a pen and paper. She wrote one sentence. "Did they make it?" The nurse nodded. "All 3. Thanks to you." Naomi closed her eyes. But the moment of peace didn't last long. A day later, a man in dress blues walked into her hospital room. Silver oak leaves on his shoulders, clipboard in hand. Not a doctor. Not a chaplain. A commander. He introduced himself briefly, never offering a handshake. "Just business. I'm here to help process your commendation," he said. "The paperwork for the Air Force Cross is ready. Just need your signature." Naomi stared at him, then glanced down at her side, where 2 shards of metal were still lodged beneath her ribs. "Who authorized the mission?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. The commander paused. "Does it matter?" he said. That was her answer. Naomi took the commendation form, stared at the signature line, then tore it in half, slowly, deliberately. The man didn't flinch. He just collected the torn paper, nodded once and said, "If you decide to change your mind, we'll mail another copy." Then, with a hint of finality, he added, "Most people don't refuse medals, Colonel. It raises questions." She looked him straight in the eye. "Maybe it should." He didn't respond. Just turned and walked out. That night, alone in the hospital bed, Naomi stared at the ceiling. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood what had just happened. The medal wasn't about honoring her. It was about closing the file. About putting a bow on something ugly and calling it resolved. But her body, still bleeding, still broken, told a different story. And Naomi Ellison had never been good at pretending things were fine. Not when they weren't. Not when the truth was still buried under silence. Weeks passed. The hospital room changed. The pain dulled. The world outside moved on. But 2 pieces of shrapnel didn't. They sat lodged in Naomi's ribcage, one near her lung, the other closer to her spine. The surgeons had reviewed the scans and said the same thing every time. "We could try to remove them, Colonel, but the risk is high. Too close to the lung. One wrong move and it collapses." So she made a choice. Leave them in. Not out of fear, but because somewhere deep down she needed them there. Each morning when she dressed, she'd run her fingers along her right side. Just beneath the skin she could feel them, small, hard, sharp like frozen memories. Not scars you could see, but reminders you could feel. To the Air Force she was a case number, a commendation file, a name on a plaque. But to her? She was living with pieces of a mission gone wrong, and no one wanted to talk about how they got there. She was given 2 months of medical leave. She used the time quietly. No interviews. No statements. Just rehab, late-night walks, and silence. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It means listening. Naomi started digging, through encrypted messages, satellite logs, backup communications. She contacted a trusted friend in data intelligence. The deeper she went, the stranger things looked. Timestamps didn't match. Drone coverage was delayed. Coordinates had been edited, post-mission. It wasn't a malfunction. It was manipulation. She wasn't paranoid. She was thorough. The kind of thorough that gets people promoted, or buried. She knew what that meant. And she knew what those metal fragments truly were now. Not just the cost of survival, but the proof. Proof that something had gone very, very wrong, and no one wanted to own it. And if they weren't going to listen to her words, maybe they'd listen to the pain still lodged in her bones. Because sometimes, the body remembers what the system tries to forget. And Naomi Ellison wasn't about to let anyone forget what was still inside her. 6 weeks after the ceremony, Naomi Ellison walked back into the same building where the medal had been pinned to her chest. But this time she wasn't there for applause. She was there for the truth. General Rollins met her in his office, a spacious room with a polished wood desk, flags in the corners, and a framed American eagle behind glass. He looked up as she entered, surprised. "Colonel Ellison," he said, standing. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." Naomi didn't shake his hand. She placed a thick manila folder on the desk and slid it toward him. "You will now." He opened it slowly. Inside were printed logs, satellite images, encrypted data reports with handwritten annotations. All flagged. All verified. "What am I looking at?" he asked, voice low. "The truth," Naomi said. "And it's not pretty." Over the next 15 minutes she laid it out. Her team had been sent into a zone flagged as minimal resistance, based on drone intelligence provided by a private defense contractor, Ethercore Technologies. The same company listed in the mission's classified procurement logs. But here's the part that wasn't in the official file. Ethercore hadn't just provided surveillance. They'd provided target simulation AI, an experimental algorithm designed to test real-time threat identification by watching live soldiers respond to hostile conditions. The ambush wasn't an accident. It was a data-gathering opportunity. And Naomi's team had been the test subjects. Rollins stared at the papers, jaw tight. "They used you." Naomi nodded. "We weren't sent in to retrieve a scientist. Dr. Moore had been confirmed dead 2 days before we deployed. But someone buried the intel and pushed forward anyway." Rollins leaned back slowly, the weight of it hitting him all at once. "You were never meant to succeed." "No," she said. "We were meant to react, and die. Or survive long enough to be studied." Silence filled the room. "Not the kind that drags. The kind that stings." "You're saying this was intentional?" Rollins asked. "I'm saying," Naomi replied, "they turned us into lab rats with rifles. And I'm the one they didn't account for, the one who lived." She took a breath. "They made me a living witness to a crime, General. And I've been walking around with the evidence in my body ever since." Rollins closed the folder. "This doesn't end here." Naomi shook her head. "No, sir. It starts here." And for the first time since she bled in the jungle, someone in command finally said the words she'd been waiting to hear. "We're going to find out who buried this." Because now the truth wasn't a rumor or a scar. It was documented. It was undeniable. And it was personal. 3 days later, Naomi found herself in a secure conference room buried beneath the Pentagon. No cameras. No press. Just 12 chairs and a table thick with silence. Around it sat representatives from the Department of Defense, Naval Intelligence, Air Force Legal Counsel, and a civilian liaison from Congressional Oversight. At the head of the room stood General Rollins. He wasn't in dress blues this time. Just a simple uniform. No ribbons. No distractions. "Everyone in this room has clearance," he said. "What we discussed today stays here until further directive." Then he turned to Naomi. "Colonel Ellison, begin when you're ready." She didn't hesitate. She stood, stepped forward, and did what no one expected. She unbuttoned the side of her uniform, raised her undershirt, and revealed the mangled scar tissue stretching from her ribs to her spine. No one spoke. One officer looked away. Another leaned in, visibly shaken. "These," she said, voice calm, "are the remains of a mission labeled minimal risk. 2 fragments of shrapnel are still inside me. Not because I wanted them, but because removing them would have collapsed my lung. She paused, scanning the room. We were told we were rescuing a kidnapped scientist. But as my investigation uncovered, that scientist was already confirmed deceased. 2 days before we ever landed. She walked to the screen and loaded the documents from the folder. Redacted logs, satellite overlays, internal emails. Her voice stayed level. This wasn't a mission. It was a weapons test. Ethercore Technologies used our team as live subjects to feed their AI reaction algorithms. Real bullets. Real bodies. Real blood. Just for data. The civilian liaison stiffened. You're saying US troops were used in a private tech simulation? I'm not saying it, Naomi replied. I'm proving it. She dropped the printed memo, one they hadn't seen, onto the table. A communication between Ethercore and a mid-level contractor coordinating the satellite feed. Dated 2 days before the mission. Labeled, Field Validation, Active Response Model. The room fell into a heavy pause. General Rollins nodded to the legal counsel. Begin internal inquiry. Full audit. Every chain of command involved. Then he looked back at Naomi. You just rewrote the narrative, Colonel? Naomi buttoned her shirt slowly. No, she said. I just told the truth. And for the first time, it was the system that went silent. Not her. The headlines never mentioned her name. Not at first. When the inquiry began, the Pentagon kept it quiet. Internal memos, sealed transcripts, limited access. But within those closed doors, something was shifting. And it started with one black woman, standing in a room full of power, refusing to be silent. Colonel Naomi Ellison didn't call it a revolution. She called it a responsibility. Over the next 6 weeks, she was asked to sit in on meetings with defense ethics boards, AI development teams, and military protocol auditors. Not because they wanted a token voice, but because they could no longer deny hers. She didn't come with a chip on her shoulder. She came with scars. And scars don't lie. They asked her what should change. She told them. No contractor gets to run simulations on live troops without direct command approval. No mission labeled low risk moves forward without 2-tier intel verification. And any soldier injured during experimental conditions must be briefed. Truthfully, no exceptions. Some in the room nodded. Some resisted. But no one dared talk over her. Because Naomi had bled for her seat at the table. She didn't wear her uniform to be honored anymore. She wore it to be heard. It wasn't long before the reforms started rolling in. The first was quiet, a revision to Joint Directive 9-81, limiting private tech contracts in live zones. The second was louder, a new field classification protocol, now nicknamed by the staff as the Ellison Clause. It required all high-risk deployments to be audited post-mission by an independent oversight panel. Naomi didn't ask for that name. She didn't need it. What mattered was that it passed. And slowly word got out. A rumor here. A leak there. A black female officer who took on the brass and walked away with her truth intact. Young cadets started bringing up her name in ethics classes. Veterans whispered about her courage over lunch in VFW halls. Even a few retired generals sent handwritten notes, not of sympathy but respect. One line kept repeating. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't flinch. She just refused to sit down. And in doing so, Naomi Ellison reminded an entire institution that real strength isn't loud. It's unshakable, quiet, and rooted in truth. It was a gray afternoon at the Air Force Academy. Naomi had just finished a closed-door session with the ethics training staff. On her way out, she passed a group of young cadets gathered under the main archway, crisp uniforms, buzz cuts, and notebooks in hand. One of them, a young black woman barely in her 20s, broke away from the group and approached her. "Ma'am," she said nervously, "do you have a minute?" Naomi stopped, offered a small nod. "Sure." The cadet hesitated, then asked, "Is it true? Everything they said, about you, about the mission, the hearings, the reforms?" Naomi smiled gently. "Depends what they said. They said you went up against the system. That you exposed something buried. And they still didn't silence you." Naomi looked at her for a long moment, not judging, not correcting. Just reading her. "What's your name?" she asked. "Cadet First Class Maya Thompson." Naomi gestured to a nearby bench. They sat. "Listen, Maya," she began, "there are going to be moments in your service when you'll feel like a ghost in the room. Especially when you're the only one who looks like you. Or thinks like you." Maya nodded slowly. "And there will be times," Naomi continued, "when silence will feel safer. Easier. But that's when your voice is needed most. Maya looked down at her hands. Weren't you afraid? That you'd lose everything? Naomi didn't answer right away. She glanced at the cloudy sky overhead. I was afraid, she said softly. Afraid I'd be forgotten. Afraid my team's pain would be buried under bureaucracy. Afraid the truth would die in a file no one read. She turned to Maya. But you know what scared me more? What? The idea that I'd carry the truth and do nothing with it. Maya swallowed hard, then asked, Do you regret it? Naomi smiled. I don't regret the wounds. I regret the silence I kept for too long. They sat in stillness for a few seconds before Maya finally spoke. Thank you for staying loud. Naomi stood, placed a hand on the young cadet's shoulder. Now it's your turn, she said. Lead like someone's life depends on it, because one day it will. And with that she walked away, back into the quiet corridors of command. But her mission? It was far from over. The auditorium was packed. Uniforms lined the rows. Cadets, officers, visiting generals. The annual Defense Ethics Summit had drawn leaders from across all branches. But the one everyone came to hear wasn't a general. It was a colonel with scars. Colonel Naomi Ellison stepped up to the podium in her standard blues. No medals, no ribbons, just a small pin on her left collar. Silver, understated, the integrity commendation awarded in private months ago. She looked out across the sea of faces, took a quiet breath, and began. I was told once that bravery meant never backing down, never breaking, always standing tall no matter what. She paused, letting the silence lean in. But the truth is, I've broken more than once. I've cried in silence. I've bled in places no camera ever caught. And I've stood in rooms where my voice didn't matter, not because it wasn't strong enough, but because people had already decided not to hear it. Eyes stayed locked on her. Even the restless cadets leaned in. I used to believe scars made you weaker, she continued. Made you less capable, less sharp, less whole. She touched her side lightly, just once, a quiet gesture only those in the front row noticed. But scars are proof that you survived something that tried to end you, that you went through fire and came out carrying the heat in your bones. She stepped away from the podium for a moment, pacing slowly. They told me I was a hero, she said. But what they really meant was, thank you for surviving in silence. She looked up. But I'm not here to be thanked. I'm here to remind you of something simple. She returned to center. When you wear this uniform, your job isn't to be perfect. It's to be honest with yourself, with your team, with the country you swore to protect. A few people nodded. A few wiped their eyes. Don't let your scars become shame. Let them become your compass. She took a deep breath, then closed with the words she'd carried alone for too long. Scars don't make you ugly. They make you undeniable. And they don't just remind you of what hurt. They remind you that you lived. The room erupted. But Naomi didn't wait for the standing ovation to end. She stepped down from the stage, walked past the applause, and out into the quiet. Outside the wind was soft, the sky just beginning to blush with late afternoon gold. She closed her eyes, hand on her ribs. For once it didn't ache, not because the pain was gone, but because finally she'd stopped carrying it alone.